Hi, everyone. Uh,
Hello.
Welcome to week 8 of Hot Pot Talk Season 2. My name is David Ng. I'm here with my dear friend and longtime creative partner, Jen Sunshine. We are the co-artistic directors of Love Intersections, which is a media arts collective that produces documentary films about QT BIPOCs. We're also members of the Vancouver Artist Labor Union Cooperative, also known as Value Co-op. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that Jen and I are beaming this episode of Hot Pot Talks from the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. Part of our work as labor activists and queer artists on unceded territories means working in solidarity with Indigenous struggles for sovereignty, decolonization, reparations, and land back. Over the past few weeks, there have been more and more uncoverings of mass graves at former residential schools. And I say uncoverings because they're not discoveries. It's known that they've been there. And there's been a call to action to support MPs Mumulak Kakak and Charlie Angus, who are calling on Attorney General David Lametti to investigate crimes against Indigenous people carried out through the residential school system. There's a link to sign the petition that's being dropped in the chat right now. Hot Pot Talks is a weekly series live streaming to YouTube and Facebook every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific Time, where we have free-flowing conversations with artists, activists, chefs, performers, poets, community organizers about what it means to be an artist facing today's realities. What ethical responsibilities do we have as artists? This season, we continue these conversations on topics ranging from anti-Asian racism, BIPOC futurity, Chinatown solidarity, diasporic food cultures, and interrogating the boundaries between everyday activism, fine art, and cultural work.
Thanks, David. We founded Love Intersections on the philosophy of collaboration, invitation, and relationship building with and within communities to tell intergenerational and intersectional stories. And a core part of our work as social practice artists have been to interrogate the boundaries of art, philosophy, community work, and activism. And when the pandemic put a pause on our creative and community work, we created Hot Pot Talks as a joyous way to continue this dialogue on art and cultural production with people we are inspired by. You're probably bored of hearing me plug our Have You Eaten Today totes by now. So we are very excited to announce our new merch line that we announced last week, actually. But we had to come up with something new to sell our souls away. We have a new line of black tees and totes, and this design is on the screen right now that you'll see. These were designed by our fellow Value Co-op member, Annie Canto, who incorporated our favorite Napa cabbage theme that David and I are consistently obsessed with, as well as rendering my own father's calligraphy into the design, translating to Have You Eaten Today? And you can purchase these at valuecoop.ca.
Great, and our colleague Cameron's going to drop the link into the chat right now. We also mentioned this last week, but we made the connection also that Lamia, who is our social media coordinator, is a member of the Vancouver Sewing Labor Union Cooperative, which is our sibling cooperative, and is actually going to be on the team that sews these. So it's very, very locally made. On that note, I want to thank our incredible team, Cameron, our lead project coordinator, and Lamia, our social media coordinator, who helped make Hot Pot Talks a reality. So we're very pleased today to introduce our guest, Chiyi Tam, who is an urban planner, a community organizer based in Vancouver on the unceded Coast Salish lands and waters in the translation between places and culture. She is currently the development manager of Kensington Market Community Land Trust in Toronto. She also organizes with Friends of Chinatown Toronto, which is also exploring a community land trust as an anti-displacement strategy for racial and economic justice. She frequently consults with groups regarding social enterprise legislation, governance, and cooperative strategies. She aims to reciprocate knowledge into community.
Welcome, Chiyi.
Hi.
How are you?
Doing really well. I love the way you said the sentence, the translation between places and culture.
Was it very dramatic?
It's the first time I've heard it out loud. Yeah.
Cool. It's beautiful. I love it.
I feel like that's really true about you guys as well. And just folks who organize in Chinatown.
Oh, that's very sweet. Well, I thought, Chi, why don't we launch into something a lighter question? And Jen, I'm stealing a question that you've used before.
Oh no, but what am I gonna use? Okay, so I have to confess because I am dying right now. I just had my second shot and I've been like having a fever all of yesterday and chills and aches. And I'm pulling myself together for this live stream. Not because I'm a martyr or anything, but because I'm genuinely just really excited about this conversation with Chiyi. But I am going to take a backseat today. So maybe I can ask that question because I won't have anything to contribute today. So Chiyi, our favorite question is, what is your favorite hot pot experience or ingredient? But I feel like you can offer an experience for us.
Oh, are we talking about the hot pot experience? I had mentioned in my family.
You can.
Because now that you're asking me what my favorite hot pot ingredient is, I'm like, oh my God.
You want
to choose your favorite child?
Yeah, I know, but this is why it's such a fun question. Why don't we make this a twofer? We can start with the ingredient and then we can eventually we can end on the experience.
Okay. The one right off the top of my head, because I have not been able to locate it in Toronto's Chinatown for a while. Thank God there is no TNT in Toronto's Chinatown yet. If there was one, I'd be able to find it. Is the fish balls that have cheese in the center? Whether they're Korean or whether they're Japanese or whether they're from Singapore, like just whoever innovated to put melted cheese in the middle of fish balls.
I've never heard of this before.
Yes, girl. So
there's such a problem. You boil them and then it explodes in your mouth and then you burn your tongue and then you're still grateful for it. It's great.
There's also the ones with mozzarella and it's like stringy too. So you bite into it and it's
that's too much.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's so extra. Wow.
So extra. It never
I'm sure it's my favorite only because I haven't had it in a long time.
It never occurred to me that cheese would be amazing on top of things like soup and ramen. And then when the Japanese did it, I was like, what is happening? It just doesn't compute. It doesn't make sense in my mind. But then when you eat it, you're like, wow, this makes all of the sense.
Well, can I just say, is there not, and we're going off tangent, but I have to, is there not a higher percentage of lactose intolerant people of Chinese descent? Because most of my family is lactose intolerant, which is why I oftentimes when
eat it anyway.
Like TNT has, for example, often like tried to, they had these big like milk dairy campaigns and I used to always take pictures of them. And my friend Andrew and I had this inside joke because we were just like, why do they keep trying to push this product on this community that most of us are lactose intolerant?
But like the dialogue around lactose intolerance, I have never had physically in Asia. Like this is a conversation that I only became aware of in Western, like amongst Asians living in Western countries. In Australia, I've had this conversation in London. I've had this conversation in Canada. But like the taboo or like the how hard it is to find dairy products in general or how expensive they are, like just kind of makes it a non-issue, I think, in general. Because you just hear that like drinking too much milk is very like like for your system, and so it's just like a grandma thing. You didn't think that it had anything to do, like your farting was just yeet hey, it had nothing to do with lactose intolerance.
Oh my God, that is so funny.
100%.
And also my mind is a little bit blown right now because I've just had this revelation. What's your favorite
100%.
hot pot experience?
Yes, I have not had a chance to experience it myself. I would love to recreate it. It is a story that my father told about my father and mother's time living in Winnipeg as young grad students. And they supposedly, in minus 30-degree weather, would be hosting a whole bunch of friends for hot pot. And it would be like, open your door and there's like a shelf of snow that you would have to shovel yourself out of, that kind of cold weather. And they would deliberately open all the windows and doors and put on multiple layers of sweaters and bomber jackets and eat the hot pot that way. And somehow the contrast in your internal temperature with the external temperature supposedly makes it yummier.
Wow.
But that's like a very Winnipeg Chinese experience.
Yeah, it's interesting because Jen, I can contrast that with your stories of growing up in Taiwan and eating it in the summer, eating spicy hot.
Yeah, we eat it in the summer. It's like deliberately as hot as possible. And the idea is that eating hot things will reduce the hotness outside. It doesn't.
Because you're just so hot.
Because you're just so there's something about it. It's kind of, and this I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but it's kind of like you would cover up, you know, right. in the heat in the summer, you would cover up because it traps your, I don't know. I have no science behind this. I have no idea.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Island and subtropical Asians just get up to like that's some very like all over the place logic there.
That's so funny. So Chiyi, we wanted to get into some of a conversation around some of your Chinatown organizing and other types of organizing that you're up to. I'm curious, how did you get into Chinatown organizing? I'm also curious how you met our friend Johnny, who was in our opening season episode as well. But
wow, then that means I have the fun of getting to tell Gold Mountain's story for the first time. So Gold Mountain, which you guys know more broadly, is also the name of an ultimate Frisbee team in Vancouver's Ultimate League. And it is a Chinatown organizer-specific Frisbee team.
I did not know this.
And in that Frisbee team, there was a time in my life when I played a lot of Frisbee. And in that Frisbee team was a person named Nat Lowe, who was like a big time Chinatown tenant organizer, was super involved in the fight against 105 Kiefer. And I had been invited to this team just because I was a Frisbee player, not because I was involved in Chinatown. But they had named it Gold Mountain. Folks from Hua Foundation, folks from like various different sort of associated projects were part of this team, which is how I first learned about Love Intersections. And I was always like, oh, there's like cool people doing like queer like projects in Chinatown. That sounds so cool. So that was like how the stories that were shared on the sidelines of Frisbee is how I first got radicalized and invited into broader tenant organizing. So it was Nat, and then Nat had been someone that Johnny had recruited into union organizing, supposedly. And so then one thing led to another. I made some posts about mutual aid on Instagram, and Value Co-op shared them far and wide, and they were so well received by the Value community. And then multiple people from Value reached out to me to say like, oh, let's talk more about this, and how worker co-ops are like formal mutual aid, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how I really learned about it.
Wow, so this is pretty recent.
This is really, really recent.
Wow. Wow,
totally.
Can you tell me a little bit about so you've seen sort of the organizing happen in Vancouver, or what's happening in Vancouver's Chinatown and also in Toronto's Chinatown. What are some of are there any similarities, differences? Because I'm also like, I'm really amazed, and I think many people are, of the land trusts that the organizing around the land trusts. And I want to get into that, but I'm also interested in sort of like, how did that, this is sorry, I don't really have a clear question, but I want to get to like, how did that grow, that the land trust grow, and sort of how, like in that context in Toronto and how it grew, comparing it to Vancouver and how we might, or folks here might think of that as an organizing strategy as well.
I have such similar questions for you guys, because I feel like just so many people have different takes, especially on contrasting Chinatowns. Some like general like geography ones. Vancouver arguably has multiple Chinatowns. Toronto very clearly has multiple Chinatowns that people recognize as Chinatown. Like people joke about Richmond being the new Chinatown, but it isn't formally sort of acknowledged that way. Whereas in Toronto, like there is very clearly a suburban Chinatown in Markham, in Scarborough, that has specific strips of commercial activity and like a Chinese Canadian cultural center out in the suburbs. And then there are two downtown Chinatowns. And so in that, it's similar in that, like, there's this like weird dialogue when you're trying to advocate for a specific Chinatown, the historic one, the downtown one, the one where there are lots of seniors in isolation, or lots of low income folks living in deeply affordable housing that's at risk of being lost, and are not able to voluntarily move to a suburb. It's hard to argue on like a purely cultural retention basis that you need to preserve that Chinatown, because people are like, yeah, but you have Richmond. Like, your culture is not in danger of erasure in this sense. And it's like, you just can't get people to understand that very, very like unique class intersected element of what a downtown Chinatown means. So that's similar. That's definitely the one big similarity. And then the super big difference, I was shocked when I moved to Toronto to learn that their Chinatown was completely like demolished and erased. I can't imagine that for any Chinatown on the West Coast, except for LA's that we can see now currently being completely demolished, all in wholesale. But Toronto's was like wholesale, completely evicted, no consultation, like just expropriated by the city. And then they built City Hall over it. So I don't think there has been a major North American Chinatown that has had to completely up and relocate like 10 streets down into a similar degree within the last multiple decades. Like, this only happened in the 60s, for context. In the 60s, they built the new City Hall in Toronto. So it's so recent that the Chinatown's almost still like building its own legs, and it never really had the opportunity to play that game that the generation of Chinatown organizers above us, like the folks who are the presidents of the family associations, all like the patriarchs, those guys, like the old guard, they call themselves the old guard. They're all about like, we need to build a Chinatown gate. We need to like add pagodas to the top of the building. We need to do this like self-fetishization exercise.
And there's
all about the street sanitization. All about the like community police and like street sanitization, and like get tourists to come spend money in Chinatown. That's a very specific and desperate strategy that worked for one generation that like has not evolved into the new era, I feel like. But Toronto hasn't even really had a chance to give that a full shot. Toronto's downtown Chinatown doesn't have a major gate. It's lost one of its last buildings that has that kind of like like the Hokkien like style, the winged corner on the buildings. I just it doesn't have like, it lost its Sun Yat-sen garden that was in the middle on Spadina. So in that regard, it's so different. I was really shocked to move from Vancouver to Toronto's Chinatown.
I've as you're saying this story, I'm sort of trying to place my connection to Chinatown organizing, and I'll be honest with you, I haven't been that. I came into it. I'm gonna date myself, but like in the 2007 and 2008, the anti-Olympics, anti-gentrification front lines, of the Woodward site, for example, right? That was a hot intersection of like the front lines of what felt like for me as like one of the frontline battles of fighting for social housing and anti-gentrification efforts in the neighborhood. And then I remember, and I was in my early 20s then, and starting to get really more involved with the activist community, and then also the intersecting organizing that was emerging around Chinatown displacement as well. But I'll be honest with you, I've really struggled with myself in placing myself in the organizing, because I'll be really frank, at one point I was like, but there's no good restaurants in Chinatown. There's good restaurants in Richmond. What is Chinatown for me, right? And yes, my great grandmother grew, and we have familial connections to the neighborhood, but I really didn't want it to be this sort of like, just because I'm Chinese, I all of a sudden are going to lay claim to Chinatown. And it wasn't really until, I'll be honest with you, a past few years when I really started to really dig into what was happening in the neighborhood and how displacement was happening through development, that I was like, okay, this is an important thing for me to actually, put some effort behind. And then of course, when Value moved into the neighborhood, the studio at the Lim Association building, it also changed the context of our organizing too. I guess, I mean, And Jen, you and I have had this conversation. I asked you frankly, even like, what the, and we're doing a piece as a part of the Chinatown Biennale too. So we were thinking about these themes about connection and also like Chinatowns. But I'm wondering, like, Chiyi, what is your sort of experience with, with your own identity in Chinatown?
I feel that similar hesitation and that similar sort of like where is my place in Chinatown? I like my family moved to Vancouver. I'm not because and it also was in direct response to people I knew in person. Like I knew the daughter of the family that runs Mingwo, and like Mingwo was such a, like a legacy business.
Yeah.
In the context of Vancouver. And then my mother married into a family at one time that like built many of the buildings on Georgia Street, on Hastings, like in Vancouver's Chinatown. And then I felt that they were really legitimate. And I just sort of like, I knew these people literally in my life who just felt like, oh, those are Chinatown people. I'm just like some second gen kid who grew up in Vancouver, like whatever. There's tons of sort of Chinese, Canadian, and Asian kids that live in Vancouver. But moving to Toronto really then unlocked like anyone can do this work. Like anyone who feels class solidarity like should be able to see, should be able to feel like, oh yeah, this is worth fighting for. Like Chinatown isn't just for consumption. Like real people live here and real people are being displaced. And cultural practices like are not being retained by architectural character and heritage codes. Like those things are completely ineffective against like all the intangible practices between folks.
Yeah. And you raise a really good point. I mean, it's the class struggle that's often being ignored too. Yeah. I wanted to ask you a question. This is linked to class and labor. We were talking about the title of the Hot Pot Talk this episode, changing the flavor of labor. And I've always been
great title, by the way. And David, you've been wanting to use this for a really long time.
I've been saving it for a very long time.
So long.
I think it's supposed to be on a tote. Like it's supposed to be a T-shirt. It's supposed to be a value product at some point.
I think so. Well, and I've always joked because like, and I always joke at value, like I really would love to rebrand value. There's layers of this. I would like, sorry, not rebrand value, rebrand or brand the labor movement to be a little bit more spicy. And I mean that metaphorically, but also thinking about like, thinking about how to make like labor organizing cool, but also like, how do we, I'm also thinking about how to bring more intersectional organizing into the labor movement. If I can use some cheesy like food metaphors, infuse and ferment some intersectionality into the labor movement. But I'm curious, Chi, when we chatted, we were talking about how different, and I'm going to state the obvious, but the labor movement and all the other types of organizing affects different communities differently. And you were sharing with us some like different, like innovative, I don't want to use the word innovative, but grassroots approaches that other communities have been tools that communities have been employing to do organizing. I'm thinking you were telling us about like something about WeChat.
Yes, that's not my organizing. That's like a story that I have that's been happily shared with me through the Workers Action Center, who shares, I think, organizing space or office space. I might be getting this wrong, with the Chinese Canadian National Council for Social Justice. They have a Toronto chapter. And so they have an organizing effort that's super on the down low. I really hope like no Chinatown supermarket bosses are watching this, but supposedly on the down low, they've been like collecting people's WeChat, and it's just like a social WeChat group of all the grocery workers, all the checkout counter ladies, all like the really, really new immigrant, super fresh off the boat folks in across all sorts of different cultural shops. Like the chefs in the back kitchen, I think would be a separate idea for a WeChat group, but just to connect folks. Cause like, isn't that like the core of like all labor solidarity. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be like a capital U unionizing
Mhm.
process or like checklist process. Like, just even having one additional resource,
Yeah.
even if it doesn't ultimately lead to all of you guys like going on strike and negotiating for better working conditions or higher pay, like that, it could just be like, oh, just more connections and resources in the neighborhood, someone to cover your shift, just like
Yeah.
mutual aid to start.
Yeah.
And so that's a really exciting idea. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been talking about that too. So we're trying to also establish a workers' action center here locally. And one of the things we've been talking about too, you know, sometimes workers, and we started off wanting to support frontline workers, and we've had conversations about this as well. That, you know, sometimes the path to the big U, as you described it, is not just the only way that we can support people's rights. You know, a lot of just even what you're describing, like mutual aid efforts, and yeah, different types of solidarity efforts for people to thrive and support each other. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. There are like so many labor related energies that are going around. So there's one story that comes from my sister working in Cha Time, and Cha Time was stealing her tips. And this was her first job in high school.
Yeah.
And like almost everyone who works at one of these bubble tea franchises is like in high school or in their undergrad. And the turnstile of employees is just like nonstop. Like, they don't
Yeah.
need to offer anyone higher wages or better conditions, because like they don't need any institutional memory in these franchises.
Yeah.
But, you know, like it didn't really take like any sort of like big organizing. It was just like her texting all the rest of her coworkers from different shifts, and then being like, then adding the manager into the group chat, all just sending angry emojis, and then that changed.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
like, yeah, teenagers are completely capable of it, so we should be capable of it too. And
Yeah.
that has like also fueled my fire around this idea that like franchises and international brands, like ramen brands, like any brands, are also taking over our Chinatowns. But to
Right.
people who don't like read any Asian languages, you
Right.
just see like Asian language posters regardless.
Right.
So like to you, it's like, oh, Chinatown's still like vaguely Asian or like multi-ethnic and cultural. Like, you
Right.
can't tell that it's been completely gutted from the inside. There is no like local decision-making power around the nature of the menu, etc. Like,
Yeah.
it's just so different in terms of like the labor relationships in the neighborhood, which went from like cash under the table for a lot of folks who didn't have
Right.
status, now
Right.
into like a totally different wheelhouse of like international students.
Right.
Yeah, and a very different generation of labor conditions.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm so curious, Chi, you know, if you can tell us about where and like how you grew up, and just like when did you realize that you're like, oh, this is a moment and I want to get into labor organizing? Is there a moment like that?
I have to like work on my like personal narrative moment here. I think there were active choices being made. The most active choice I made was to play the game of respectability politics and like just like systemic knowledge very intentionally through applying to grad school and doing an urban planning degree. I knew that like leveraged my skill set really well, and I would do that. But before that, like the general vibe I would describe myself with was sort of like Boba liberal, was just like super proud to be all about like being a woman of color with like no actual interrogation or intersectionality around that. So that was who I was. And I won't say that's not who I am still sometimes. But yeah, working my way out of it for sure.
Yeah, in our pre-interview, you had mentioned it was like the me to we
generation.
The me to we amnesia that we all got inducted into like through the Vancouver School Board. And and through these like massive we days that we got to go to for free. Like it was like kind of cult-like, but it totally, the framing of our contribution, the amount of energy that you see the same folks who were the same age we were capable of mobilizing massive protests and now elevating their game from mobilizing skills, into deep organizing skills.
Mhm.
They're inviting me for talks about that. Like they're inviting like incredibly sophisticated organizers to talk about abolition and like deep relationship building, as opposed to like pure social media mobilizing. They're capable of climate strikes. And it's like, what could we have been doing this whole time if we were not like distracted from kindergarten to grade 12 with this like bake sale program that we like exhausted all of our energy outside of homework for all of like the type A kids.
Yeah, I remember the first like environmental organizing initiative that this was a thing in many high schools. It was literally called sustainable consumption. It was like literally it was that. It was called that, and we had different campaigns under this umbrella of sustainable consumption.
It's all very.
I was very passionate about fair trade for a while.
Yes, fair trade.
Which was like 100%. That I was so passionate about that.
Yeah. But like, I don't know if I shared this in our pre-interview, but like, you know, I remember the first Me Too Weed rally that I went to. They had a big this RBC moment, literally RBC moment for water, where they gave everyone plastic necklaces for this 3-minute moment that lit up like through this like big sort of light thing in the stadium, and then you threw away that plastic thing after. Like it was just so can't believe it.
And so by the time like we're grown and we're like in our late 20s and our early 30s, and then it turns out the Kielburgers have been corrupt and evil this whole time, we're not surprised. We've been healing from that for a long time now.
I want to get deeper into Boba liberalism, because
we've been nerding out about this the entire time.
Tell me what you've learned.
Well, it just spoke to so much of exactly what you were describing. A lot of like so maybe I should define Boba liberal. Well, I'm going to try to define Boba liberalism to the best of my ability for our audience.
I don't have a definition for it.
Well,
I just keep on saying that thing around like, oh, you know this person, they're like, they do this. They like love Hollywood representation. But like, if you ask them whether they'll come to the front lines and defend a popo from getting evicted, like they don't know what the hell you're talking about.
They don't know what, exactly.
So no, I will pull up in my light research, although I have to just give a disclaimer. I cannot really process complex thought right now, but I can read out verbatim what others have said. So Boba liberalism was first defined by Twitter user at diaspora_is_red. Boba liberalism is a substanceless, trend-chasing spectacle that is mainstream Asian American liberalism, derided as shallow, consumerist, capitalist, and robbed of meaning. So it's ostensibly it's like surface level activism. So like you said about like Hollywood representation, so I'm thinking like Andrew Yang and Crazy Rich Asians, like that.
Yeah, and Boba being like this sort of like quirky like Asian thing that we should be very like, this is our culture. Look at us. We're unique. This is our mascot.
It's sweet, but it's like bad for you. You know, it's like,
and they steal your tips.
It's devoid of nutrients. Exactly. Yeah.
But you know what I was interested in, like where I started like digging deeper is what it really spoke to me about was a lot of what Jen and I had been in a lot of conversations around like the Stop Asian Hate movement and the stuff that has emerged from that, and this sort of these all of these Boba liberals that or new Boba liberals that were not even Boba liberals before, but now all of a sudden are all of this hype in the Asian community, and for demands for recognition of anti-Asian violence, right? And I'm interested in how that sort of I was interested after we had our initial call about how that bumps up against the broader anti-racist like struggles against racism and decolonization, and how does that bump up against Indigenous and Black struggles as well. And thinking about I'm talking a lot now, but I just specifically the claims for the demands for hate crime legislation, right? And how that is literally supporting the police state, and how that adversely affects Black communities and Indigenous communities. Sorry, I don't really have a question. I just kind of went off on a rant.
It is. That's exactly, that so far has been our fear of it. I won't say, I will say that we've done a little more analysis and like vibing around, okay, then what are we going to do with this situation? There was a moment, especially in Asian Heritage Month, where Friends of Chinatown's inbox was so bombarded from every media outlet possible around the hashtag Stop Asian Hate. And we were just like, we're not going to do any of it. That's it. We're just not going to do any of it. And I've said this in other places, but I really felt, especially in seeing how similar the rhythm and some of the superficial aesthetics around the Stop Asian Hate hashtag, especially as it manifested on social media, it looked like Boba liberals were appropriating the tools and the strategies that the movement for Black Lives had taught us how to do, and I don't know more. And it really felt like they were doing that without this like broader connection to abolition. That is what distinguishes it. And like the fear is, yes, that this will just materially lead to more policing in Chinatowns, literally. But at the same time, I wouldn't say that it's like completely devoid of meaning. I do think because I came from there as well, had I not also been like invited into an entryway and like I was slowly observed, I acknowledge, over time to see whether I was trustworthy, whether like I could be trusted to like be in a tenant facing situation. But like we need to still be building those pathways for this incredible influx of interest of folks who for the first time genuinely are wanting to speak out about this. And so if this is their like gateway like entry moment, that's great. But are there enough ladders to capture that? We also had an influx of people signing up to organize with us, and we were really clear in the orientations around those values, around like, here's our understanding and definition of what land back is. How do you vibe with that? It's totally cool if you don't know all the answers to that. We don't either, but this is the intention for this space. And so like I do think there's opportunity there.
I was just gonna make a joke, like dangle the bubble tea in front and lure them into the deeper organizing. Sorry, Jen, you were gonna say?
Yeah, it's the swag kit that we send out.
I was just gonna say I'm a firm believer of diversity of tactics and strategies. So if this is one of them that is the entryway for deeper analysis, then great.
Yeah. We've invited Dylan Rodriguez, who wrote that article towards an abolitionist. Oh, what's the name of the article?
Future?
Sorry, give me 1 second. Oh, here. The Asian Exception and the Scramble. Oh, sorry. Oh, here. The Asian Exception and the Scramble for Legibility Toward an Abolitionist Approach to Anti-Asian Violence. So if I may shamelessly plug, we are having a conversation with him on August 11th on Hot Pot Talks.
Actually, there is some connection because he was just sharing how in our pre-interview that what's scary right now is that like, police and officials are learning critical race theory. And so they're actually like learning the language and the rhetoric so they can better understand. And that's actually what's most terrifying of all.
Even the transformative justice language.
Yeah, all of that is learned and possibly weaponized. Which actually
we really felt that like over like maybe 2 weeks ago now, there was like a huge incident where a really progressive, very like outspoken advocate was doing something that materially could cause harm in Chinatown, and it ended up becoming that way because they were trying to host a like spectacle and entertainment incident, and we had to like literally put a safety warning out and like call and other folks decided to like organize to defend Chinatown Center. There's a mall called Chinatown Center, and like literally had to defend the center of Chinatown. And it comes from like progressive spaces. So it's totally. Someone once told me, I wonder whose quote this is, but someone once said to me, capitalism is amazing at solving itself.
Mhm.
And I think that
Yeah.
applies across all the other big systems as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a question for you, Chi, but it just slipped my mind. Do you have any
Okay,
questions?
I have
Yeah,
questions for you guys.
please.
I do want to hear your contrast of like Chinatown spaces you guys have seen around the world, or like
Mm,
stories you've heard. And I'm really, really curious, especially because of your relationship with the Lim Family Association and their building.
mhm,
That is like very hopeful to me, because honestly, that was the thing that made me most excited about Value Co-op.
mhm,
Like,
mhm.
yes, it's great. It's like doing so many dimensions of great. It's like changing like labor relations. It's like a worker co-op. It's also unionized. It's so many exceptionalisms
Mhm.
in our world. But I was like, oh, it's an anti-displacement project. Like, it is materially committing to supporting and digitizing their archives. Like, in your
Mm,
announcement, there was this like,
mhm,
wow, what a way to materially and financially innovate around our relationships to these, like the original land trusts, the family associations. So I'm really
mm,
curious about unlocking that for family associations around the world.
mm.
And yeah, like wondering about young people getting more involved in the governance of these spaces. Tell me what
Yeah,
that's like. Tell me what the inside of that is
yeah.
like.
That was my question. I was going to ask you about the land trust, so that's a very good connection. So, so it really, I mean, so the company that I work for, Hello Cool World, the founder has lived in the building for 30 years, and Hello Cool World was founded there 21 years ago, and I've been working for the company for that long, so I've known the association for a very long time. But it's interesting, Chi. I never thought of that type of work as like in the light of even displacement. What we entered the when we so what, we were invited to lease this when we were invited to lease this space, it was really about developing like real reciprocal relationship with the association, and using our surpluses when we have surpluses. We're very starting an organization during COVID was very challenging,
Yes.
but in all seriousness, like we have Value Co-op doesn't has a no surpluses, no kickbacks model, and so we were like, okay, well, there's a lot. How do we um how do we use our resources to support community? Which relationships do we choose? And so we started with the place where the studio that we were at. But it was a really, because I've been asked a similar question, like how did that happen, that you were able to collaborate with the association? And it was really like, I have to say, many artists, including Johnny, actually. Johnny, he shared this story in the first episode, but he went to their AGM by himself because I was busy, and the elders were so, they were just they kept refilling his tea, they kept feeding him and translating for him, and it was from that meeting to like setting up another meeting with four of us, and then Emily pointing to these beautiful books. We have people who work with archives, artists that work with archival stuff, and just literally pointing to them and saying, these are so beautiful. And then an elder saying like, oh, we want this. We've always wanted it preserved. Oh, we've always wanted a website. And then, us as artists going like, ding, ding, ding. This is exactly what we want to do. Right. And then opening up conversation from there. So, I know Jen and I always talk about relationships, and I hate to always to sound like I'm romanticizing it, but it really is that, like, of course there was a long connection because of my uh, relationship with the building, but it was really just, those small inklings of um, asking, and attending things, and hearing. That's probably the biggest one, is just really hearing what were the needs and wants of the association, and then building it from there. It's kind of grown into this kind of continuing project too, which is exciting. But yeah, I'm hoping to do more after when the COVID restrictions totally lift. I'm
Because
curious.
there's
Yeah,
so much potential there.
Yes.
Like, I'll get to the land trust
Yes.
Oh, yes,
connection
okay.
from the family associations.
Yeah.
But like when I'm invited to give talks about like, oh, a land trust in Chinatown, I first have to explain what a family association is to like the urban planner types and like the folks who are organizing like Little Tokyos and like other types of neighborhoods that are being gentrified. I'm like, like Chinatown has a very specific phenomenon of regional and family associations. And the family associations are like literally, if your last name is Chan or Wong, like go find the Chan or Wong family association and like supposedly you guys will be eligible for membership. And then like if your grandpa's grandpa came from a specific province or a specific village somewhere in Asia, you could probably find a regional association for that. And first of all, I didn't realize how novel that was. Like to me, I'm like, oh yeah, they exist. Like I don't ever hang out there, but like that's where we go for various random functions. But they like this idea that they were created as mutual aid efforts for folks, you know, to come over living in extremely low wage conditions. They would be the people who would set you up probably with housing. And if not literally like referring you to housing, literally housing you initially. In Toronto, so many of them own rooming houses and like boarding rooms with shared kitchens and bathrooms, but like a room that you can still call your own, that you pay so little rent on. And so you can like get a cash job in the back of the kitchen while you like find your feet, so on and so forth. And then folks who would be able to commiserate over, yeah, I tried that visa application and it didn't work, and various statuses of immigration. So for hundreds of years, this has been a really effective mutual aid solution. And they don't call themselves co-ops, and they don't call themselves unions, and they don't call themselves land trusts. But they've been doing that. They have totally been doing that. And I love that you guys just like, your intention came from doing reciprocal relationship with them. And that's it. That's the key. Like all anti-displacement work should be grounded in reciprocal relations in the neighborhood. And like that, I think that's the takeaway there. It's like, it's also almost a side effect that this would hopefully contribute to them not being displaced from Chinatown, because that is an issue. Like these family associations have an aging membership. People are not paying a lot of membership dues. They're not paying a lot to go to these events that they host. They don't have a lot of revenue sources. And if they have an ounce of building debt still in that building or the properties that they own, they are very at risk of all of these solicitations coming at them because they own downtown property. They are getting door knocks and flyers and are being harassed by real estate agents. And so many presidents at various meetings that I have been able to find records of genuinely will periodically bring up to their membership, like, should we consider selling our building? So the pressure is totally there. And like these important cultural spaces are totally at risk of being lost.
Yeah, I was going to mention. You reminded me of two things. I was just thinking, like, you know, the in terms of reciprocity, like of course we've raised grants to do this work for them and to support them. They did a really expensive. They restored their front facade, and it was like quadruple the amount. Like I'm literally talking, some of the association members had to come out of retirement, pull mortgages on their homes to like personally pay for it, right? But and they've also just been like, after after doing some work with them, they've been because there's a lot of filming that happens in Chinatown, so if they get funding for filming, they'll share it with us in this, like, they'll just like email us and say, hey, we got some funding from the film, we're going to split it with you guys.
I didn't know that.
With the tenants in the
That's
building,
great.
Right?
What?
Yes. Charge them to photograph your building. Absolutely. Yes.
Wow. But I was thinking, Chiyi, what you were also mentioning, when you were talking, it also reminded me of sort of how do we what's the term? Sort of tap into our different avenues of organizing. I'm just thinking, like, because part of what we've been able to do with the LIM Association is, they've been applying through heritage and building funding, but through the co-op. And one of the reasons why we actually started Value Co-op was because, Value Co-op is technically a for-profit business. And so the type of financing that we can access that a nonprofit can't is something that we wanted to do to start to do labor organizing, right? And similarly with the community arts, the community projects working group is now we can also tap with the Lim Association, because we are a nonprofit arts organization that we're building, also tap into arts funding to support their archiving work as well. But tell me, Chiyi, we're running out of time.
That is innovation. That is capital I innovation.
It's
What you
sneaking our
guys are
way
doing.
around the
Or hacking the
capital.
system.
Yeah.
People out here talking about, like, okay, in the policy world, they're like out here about like community wealth building, civic capital, impact investments. Like it just nonstop. And like and you guys, without all the jargon, are like literally doing it. So yeah. But the land trust is a specific strategy that is part of that ecosystem that hopefully can be introduced. And I think there are a lot of connections to labor organizing, like in terms of potential. To explain what a land trust is, it basically means holding property together in common. Not as in like co-ownership, like the three of us, all three of us are on title and we all own a third of a property. None of us own the property, but we all can vote on decisions about that property through the land trust, because we're land trust members. So it's a way to sort of guarantee that like any given generation's interest in that property won't sway to the degree that we have seen with nonprofits selling off their businesses or their properties, etc. And it's a way to like specifically democratically control one specific economic asset in our neighborhoods, like a huge determining asset in our neighborhoods, and to decide what the land use above that building will be, because that can be completely democratically voted on. Who are you going to choose as tenants? Who should be prioritized? What type of businesses? Do we need more food businesses? Are we losing grocers? Are seniors going to be our main focus? Do we need more artists here? Like those are conversations you can have as a collective, as a land trust strategically. So ideally in Toronto, we are now seeing a land trust per gentrifying neighborhood, like the ones that have been historically immigrant neighborhoods, like Kensington Market, like Chinatown, who have all of these like buried histories of solidarity with Indigenous organizers and Black organizers. That's something else that Vancouver and Toronto's Chinatown has in common, in that they both are on like very, very highly symbolic Indigenous sites, and that both Chinatowns directly used to share or are directly next to a significant like Black street of the downtown core. And so we're rediscovering that with Toronto's Cecil Street, which is in the middle of so-called Chinatown right now. And obviously Vancouver's reclaiming of Hogan's Alley by organizers there. So like there's so much potential in terms of like community directly controlling property and like completely transforming, just taking property off the speculative real estate market to just put a quick pause on the how hot the whole situation is as it keeps on running away from us.
So now I'm very interested in this, because I haven't actually thought of it as I kind of knew what it was, but I hadn't thought about it in the in the significance of what you're describing. So I guess I don't want to ask how does one establish a land trust, but sort of like is this like something that you have to petition? Would have to petition the city for, and have like some sort of I'm just curious in terms of the actual establishing of it.
Totally. A small group of committed citizens can form a land trust. You can form it as a co-op, you can form it as a nonprofit. You just need to legally form it as an organization that can hold an asset with a specific mandate to never sell the asset. So long as that's in your like original articles of incorporation, that makes it significantly difficult enough for members later on to overturn that. So you're just incorporating another nonprofit, but it's democratically run.
Right, but you'd have to own the land.
Your goal is to acquire land. So lots of land trusts start with no land, and their goal is to acquire land within 10 years, let's say. So that was like Parkdale. And in other cases, there's like land that a donor or a city wants to give away to a community group for democratic control. And they will like pop up and form a land trust deliberately to hold that. So we saw that with Toronto transferring more than 100, 200 some properties in Toronto. maybe 3 weeks ago that was announced, to a new land trust called Encircle Community Land Trust, and then to an existing democratically run community land trust, Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust, which is grassroots. So there are many different types of land trusts. Some that are like grassroots, democratically governed and held, and some that are just sort of like a convenient tool. Kind of like if you think about like natural parks that used to be some like rich dude's private property years and years ago, and he was like a big time conservationist, and he like donated his land and became a natural park. Those are also land trusts. They're like land conservancies. So in a way, you're just doing it before affordable housing. Because it's at risk of development and at risk of becoming renovictions in a wave as well. Yeah.
Wow, cool. Chiyi, I'm curious, what are your next plans? Organizing or not? Or even like summer plans? I'm curious.
I'm like very lucky to be doing paid organizing.
Nice.
For straight out of the gate. So like I'm so pleased with that. That's what I'm going to be doing for the foreseeable future. Cool. More land trust shenanigans. Really hope to file those articles of incorporation for a potential Chinatown land trust if that's what Chinatown ultimately deems appropriate. If they decide to like agglomerate some kind of mega chosen family association, and the Gay Asian Alliance comes back into full force and like takes over Chinatown again, where they used to have many bars, you know, like maybe that could be a different manifestation, and we just like throw out the idea of using the land trust tool as an excuse, but we build the ecosystem anyway. So that's the next step.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. Do you have any other questions for us?
I think somebody needs to get really horizontal really quickly.
You're not wrong.
Everybody get vaccinated.
Yes.
I swear it's fun. It's way more fun than Jen's making it look.
Yeah. It's worth it in the end.
Well, I will say that I'm very grateful. I always say that when I'm suffering, it's important, because when I am then I'm more grateful for the times I am healthy. So I know that blue sky is coming.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Chiyi. It was so good to have you on our show.
Great. Thank you guys so much.
See you later.
Okay, let's introduce our next guest. We have Adrian Stimson. So excited, who's an Indigenous artist, and we're going to be talking to him.
Yeah, Adrian, we're going to be talking to him about his work, Lini Sukumapi, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which is an installation at the Remy Art Gallery that features a community dinner that launched his collaboration with artist A.A. Bronson. A.A. Bronson's ancestor was an archbishop as in the residential school that Stimson and his ancestors went to, and Jen and I are going to ask Adrian about their collaboration process and the journey that they went through. Yeah, so Adrian also does has drag personas as well, Buffalo Boy and the Shaman Exterminator. So we're going to ask him about the role of art in decolonization. So catch us next week.
Have a good night, everyone. Bye.
Good night.